Hidden far beneath the surface, away from the prying eyes of the world, there lies a secret network of communities linked together by one thing: their shared love of music. My name is Zan, some call me Rich Mom, and welcome back to my newest series. I'll be your guide today, so stay close and stick around. You never know what you may find in the underground. It is astounding to say that there exists such an artist that has produced multiple Grammys, influenced artists such as Ariana Grande, Casey Musgraves, and Taylor Swift, and yet has managed to slip beneath the gaze of the larger public. You will certainly recognize her music, but for those of a younger generation, you may not recognize her name. If you, as well, are a lover of music and well-researched, you may already know very well of who I speak of. On today's episode of The Underground, we shine a light on none other than Imogen Heap. Let's take a step back now, shall we? Raised just northeast of London in Essex, Imogen, named after the British composer Imogen Holst, since a very young age had always been pulled towards musical expression, being a multi-instrumentalist before even finishing middle school, having first learned piano, followed by the cello, and then the clarinet, would, in her spare time, record herself playing the piano with a cassette player while singing over it. Her life, however, would take a sharp detour when she would be sent off to boarding school following her parents' separation. It was here, however, where she stated that she was able to properly take the time to learn the basis of music production, such as sequencing and sampling, whilst using Cubase on an Atari console. Following the rather grueling years spent at boarding school, as she's described them, Imogen would be enrolled at the prestigious Brit School of Performing Arts, where she would professionally learn music production, leading into the very gracious start of her professional career. Signed to Almost Sounds at age 18, this would be the moment where her career would start to blossom. Around this period in time would be where she would come into contact with producer Guy Sigsworth, whom she met through her manager at the time. Sigsworth, who was already in the process of making a name for himself, recently co-writing for Seal's debut album and having been director for Bjork's live band, took an immediate interest in Imogen's voice, and the two soon became very well acquainted. Their first real collaborations together would be with the band Acacia, an experimental group comprised mainly of singer Alexander Blackmoth Nyleer, Guy Sigsworth on production and keys, and Imogen Heap as backup vocals. This group, however, only ever produced one LP, Cradle, which was not a commercial success, but did garner a lot of attention for the group, being a launching pad for many of the members' careers. In between all of this, Imogen had been writing material for her debut LP, which would be released June 16, 1998, entitled I Megaphone, an anagram of her name. This debut album would embrace a more alternative rock sound mixed with a harsh industrial influence, creating a very unique instrumental soundscape for the then 20-year-old singer. The album's opening track, Getting Scared, which Imogen describes as a revenge fantasy that turned out to be real, would be the only track on this LP to be co-written and co-produced by Guy Sigsworth. The rest of the album, however, would see production assistance from Dave Stewart of Eurythmics and David Kane. An electric introduction to the young musician from Essex, but this would be her only release with Almost Sounds, as the label would be dissolved in 2000. Guy Sigsworth, however, would commence work on a new project in 2001, which initially had no set collaborators. The idea was to incorporate a different artist, poet, rapper, on every track, with Guy, of course, primarily taking care of production. But after having invited Imogen to add vocals on the track, the two decided it would be better to work as a duo instead, under the name Frou Frou, which is a French onomatopoeia for rustling, taken from a poem by Rimbaud. The first song for the album to be written was Maddening Shroud, which is a reworking of the track of the same name from their days spent with Acacia. They would release their first and only LP, Details, in mid-2002, and it was met with critical acclaim. The two would shape up to be an interesting pair, with Imogen's ethereal, wisp-like vocals gliding effortlessly over the production of Sigsworth, creating an audio atmosphere unlike any other of the time and even now, ranging from the dreamy pop masterpiece of Let Go to the melodically driven Flicks. Sigsworth and Heap proved their strengths were in unity and experimentation. Their unique sound, however, would prove to be a challenge to reproduce when playing live. So, to combat this, they adapted an all-new way of performing, as a traditional band setup wouldn't allow for their music to be played correctly. Imogen said that during this period, she would sing through a piece of equipment called an electric repeater, which would allow her to stack vocals and harmonize with herself while playing live. I'll need you to remember this little detail. It'll be very important later. This acclaim, however, did not translate into album sales, and Details ended up not being an enormous commercial success. The two both decided that it would be more beneficial to continue on with their respective solo careers, not necessarily disbanding the group, but rather engaging in an indefinite period of inactivity. Beginning in 2003, Imogen, consistently on the path of evolution, had announced the commencement of a brand new solo album to be completed in about a year's time. However, the funds for this endeavor were tight. Having been dropped by Almo just a few years prior, she would have to finance this project 100% by herself. Recorded mainly in her London apartment at the time, this new LP would yet again see Imogen experiment with brand new ideas sonically, completely unafraid of being an anomaly within the musical sphere. This record, Speak For Yourself, was the first release that was 100% written, produced, engineered, and arranged by Imogen. This album would see the use and mixture of several different genres, as well as sounds, organic and electronic, that would mesh together to form the bubbly, industrial, glittering, glitchy, and pioneering sound of the release. Every track on this album is as standout can be, all trying something different and unique, like Good Night and Go, which is a rose-colored pop track describing the aches of a new crush, which features a guitar solo by Jeff Beck, or the opener Headlock, which drags you into her world immediately, or Just For Now, where Imogen's love for vocal layering may be most evident, creating a dreamlike aura filled with growing harmonies, wispy background vocals, all supported by a gentle piano. This album would see a graceful release, debuting number 2 on Billboard's Top New Artist chart. And of course, the track Hide and Seek would become a massive hit and was RIAA certified gold. Its use in the Fox series The OC, and subsequently the SNL skit that spoofed this scene, as well skyrocketed the track's popularity, as well as its sampling in the Jason Derulo track, What You Say. She has also stated in an interview with UCW Entertainment as well that a big part of this album, and her work in general, was to use as many sounds as possible and to blend them in as organically as she could. In the interview she states, "One night I decided to record my boyfriend and I eating dinner. I wanted to get the sound of the room, so on Hide and Seek, for example, you can actually hear the sound of a frying pan. People might think it sounds like rain, but it's a frying pan. Certain sounds give the music a width and a space, and that's important." Another aspect of why this album sounds so unique and particular as well has to do with the fact that Imogen does not follow a straightforward recording path. She said as well that, "Many of the sounds that I work with start off as organic instruments, guitar, piano, clarinet, etc. But I do love the rigidity of electronic drums. For this record, I would record live drums and then I would spend a day editing them to take the life out of them. I like to breathe my own life into these sounds, and I do try to keep the air in the music. Some people think electronic music is cold, but I think that has more to do with the people listening than the actual music itself." For her sophomore album, Imogen would once again break conventions, push the norms of pop and electronic music, and set a precedent of the quality that is expected when you see the name Imogen Heap on a record. Before closing out this period and beginning work on the next release, Imogen would be nominated for 2 Grammys for the categories of Best New Artist and Best Song Written for Motion Picture, for the track Can't Take It In, which she wrote for the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Hello everyone, and we are now well and truly into 2009, and it's been a great year so far. I'm very excited because I've done lots of fantastic work, as you'll be glad to know.
Imogen has stated that she started frequently blogging and tracking the progress of her album's completion during the creation of Speak For Yourself. Previously afraid of showing this intimate process, Imogen thought it better to double down and open up completely during the making of her second LP, Ellipse, which was inspired by her home/studio at the time. It's on this release as well where we see Imogen become once again more ambitious within her production, seeing her experiment with even more sounds and more instruments and more patterns. She's also said in an interview that
I do start sometimes with the computer and, make noises with synthesis and stuff. But I really tried to get every single sound that was in the house, like from the kitchen sink to a jack-in-the-box that somebody gave me for Christmas. I wanted to put everything on the record, even if it was just for 1 nanosecond. But there's endless possibilities. Every single sound on the entire planet you can use.
And this is heard evidently when you listen just a little bit more closely to the enriching layered vocals over top of the rising arpeggio on Wait It Out, or on Bad Body Double, where the slapping sound on the snare is Imogen using her own behind as a sort of clapping sound. And of course, the production is sleek, overtly clean, intentional, and obsessively detail-oriented. It is evident that the skills that she presented on Speak For Yourself were meticulously sharpened to perfection. Ellipse would also be a landmark moment in her career, further cementing her as an unstoppable creative force, with this only being heightened when she took home the Grammy for Best Engineered Album in 2010, being the first and only to date woman to ever receive this award. But what does one do when they feel like they're repeating themselves? For Imogen, she sets out for new experiences. The idea for a new record done the same way she had done them in the past seemed stagnant and limiting. She craved new experiences. So she had decided to record a new song every 3 months, and by the end of it, she would have a fully fleshed out body of work, unlike anything that she's ever made up to this point. This new method allowed Imogen to truly work and feel everything in the moment, with her essentially eliminating what she calls the delayed feeling, where you write a song and then 3 years later, when it's not relevant anymore, it comes out. Taking this unconventional approach gave Imogen the freedom to fully flesh out the concepts that would be explored on this upcoming project, and would incorporate even more sounds and genres that were up to this point unused by Imogen, like the song ZZ She Knows, which was written while she was abroad in China for 2 months, or Neglected Space, which she worked on whilst working with a charity organization to restore a walled garden in Bedford Park. This album would be the result of 3 years worth of travel, exploration, and once more, experimentation. Sparks? Her 4th solo album, released on Megaphonic Records the 19th of August 2014, and this would be her most ambitious record yet, with Imogen taking her creative process 10 steps forward while simultaneously weaving her love for technology into the fabric of this album, specifically on the single Runtime. An adamant admirer of anything tech-related, this would be the first time she would incorporate this appreciation into her music. Having recently met with Michael Breidenbrucker, founder of RJDJ, at a tech panel, the two would collaborate together along with Intel to create the now no longer available Runtime app. And this app, as she explains it, generates a one-of-a-kind soundtrack for your run by recording ambient sound, your footsteps, your breathing, perhaps the chirping of the birds or honking cars, and layering them onto an existing electronic track. Then, as you run, the app plays the song, adjusting the beats per minute so the music will automatically change tempo to match your running pace. I then took our demo app out for a run and recorded the results. From this, I formed the basis of Runtime, the song. She said in an interview with Gizmodo. This wouldn't be all, however, because it would also be during the creation of this album where we would see the genesis of what was then entitled The Glove Project, a pioneering piece of technology that would push the limits of what is possible within the world of music production. Always on the cutting edge of creation and wanting to push further during her live performances, Imogen and a team of researchers and developers led by Professor Tom Mitchell began work on this project that would allow the user to bend and manipulate music with their own hands. And this project would see a variety of different iterations before being finalized as the Mimu gloves, which she has used a number of times on various different performances, as well as Ariana Grande, whom is an enormous fan of Imogen, utilizing an early version of the instrument during her honeymoon tour in 2015. Sparks as well saw collaborations from artists such as deadmau5 and B.O.B., and this album would once again be fairly well received from the public, garnering Imogen yet another Grammy nomination, this time for Best Boxed or Special Limited Edition Package and the spot of #1 on the Billboard Dance/Electronic Albums chart. During this period, we really see Imogen embrace all that makes her such a fascinating artist to follow, giving us the unpredictability that characterizes her work, the fearlessness to try something untried and different, and the absolute drive to find the connecting point for all of her passions, creating a beautiful mix as we've seen already. For some, this would be the perfect moment to pull back and dial it down, but of course, this would not be the case for Imogen, who instead chooses to push further into the unknown, because not too long after, she would be contacted by Stephen Hoggett about a mysterious theatrical project with no other information other than it is focused on a boy with a scar. Imogen swiftly began work on a new batch of orchestrations. This theater piece, of course, would be none other than Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, the 8th installment of the franchise. Strangely enough, however, Imogen had never read the novels, nor seen the films, which turned out to work perfectly in her favor, with the team behind the play not wanting any sort of resemblance to the music in the films, instead opting for a completely different musical experience. This body of work consists of brand new compositions in the forms of orchestral, piano, and electronic music, spanned across 4 suites or 42 tracks that follow the progression of the story, with each suite taking on a different theme and sound, as well as a reprise of Hide and Seek, the only track that contains lyrics on this album. She would win the Drama Desk Award in 2018 for Outstanding Music in a Play, and would once again be nominated for a Grammy in 2020 for Best Musical Theater Album. Following her work on this play, however, we wouldn't see too much activity from Imogen until late 2022. The next release we would see would be the mainly instrumental albums, Chordata Bites 1 and 2, in collaboration with biologist and wildlife filmmaker Dan O'Neill. Throughout the past few years, we have seen less and less musical activity from Imogen, but that does not mean that she has not been active in other areas, mainly, again, in the field of technological advances like Imogen, her project to turn herself and her proper voice into an AI, that she hopes one day will be available to the public, but states that she would prefer this project to be released on acceptable terms. Or as well, her ongoing project, Mycelia, which uses blockchain technology to release and distribute music in the hopes of leveling the playing field for musicians against an industry that is unfairly structured. She released the track Tiny Human as Mycelia's first test run in 2015, and as of 2018, the track had generated £30,000 in revenue. And as well, she posts frequent updates on her app as well, where you can hear new snippets and see behind the scenes, with one of her latest projects being a track entitled What Have You Done To Me?, coupled with a music video, which I am hoping will release soon. When taking a larger view at Imogen's expansive career, it is impossible not to be astounded by the amount of awe-inspiring work that she has birthed since her professional debut in 1998. If everything that I've listed wasn't enough, here's more. She co-wrote and produced the Taylor Swift track Clean, which won the Grammy for Album of the Year in 2016, is once more a huge inspiration for Ariana Grande, whom has covered Imogen many times in the past and has cited her as an inspiration a plethora of times, Lil B, whom has sampled Imogen's work on many tracks, a few being BOR, Birth of Rap, and I'm God, produced by Clams Casino, whom is also a huge fan. Casey Musgraves, who stated in an interview with GQ when working on her album Golden Hour, what would it sound like if Imogen Heap made a country album? Would it work? Would it make sense? Pink Pantheress, as well citing Imogen as an inspiration in an interview with NME, among many others, such as the incredible Caroline Polachek, Pentatonix, and Ellie Goulding. As well as Imogen being one of the first artists to really properly utilize social media to connect with her fan base in the early days of YouTube, Twitter, and MySpace. And not to mention the fact that she was also an early adapter of independently releasing music, a trend that was and still is inhabitual for artists in pop music. Her obsessive attention to detail and ceaseless passion for sound is one of the many things that make Imogen such a force of nature in the world of music. Coupled with her continual curiosity, Imogen Heap manages to create living, breathing ecosystems within her music that grow each and every time you listen to it. With her music as well, even her early works with Frou Frou still sounding absolutely fresh, as if they were recorded just recently and not nearly 2 decades ago. Lyrically choosing to be vague as if writing in an unbreakable code, inspired by moments that transpire in day-to-day life, with subjects ranging from love to breakups to even cellulite. She manages to enamor the auditor with so much emotion that it is impossible to sit still when listening to her work, and her brilliant production work that she spends hours upon hours tweaking, editing, and perfecting, with even her demos having a lush and pristine luster that many would dream of producing, like A New Kind of Love from her days with Frou Frou, for example, which only just recently released officially, where Imogen's wispy vocals throw you into a trance coupled with the beautiful breakbeat and magnificent strings that tie everything together in a beautiful array of musical mastery. I, myself, have been a long-time admirer of Imogen, so it has been an absolute pleasure to recount the incredible story of her legacy so far. Thank you so very much for joining me in the second installment of this series. I hope to find you in the next episode of The Underground. Thank you guys yet again for making it to the end of this video. This one was especially fun to make because, as I mentioned, I am a nerd for anything Imogen/Frou Frou related. I'd love to produce an episode a month at least for you guys, but sometimes life does get in the way. So, any and all support that you send is greatly appreciated. A like and a subscribe really do go a long way. And I would really appreciate it if you'd click that bell as well so you don't miss any future uploads. Thank you all once again. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.